SaaS Therapy.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of SaaS Therapy. My name is Todd Kirk, and I am joined today by my co-host, Casey Trujillo. This is the show where we talk about how you can save your most important business relationships, your customers. And we are joined today by an amazing guest, Maranda Dziekonski. Welcome, Maranda. We're so glad you're here today.
Welcome, and I am very happy to be here. And what the audience isn't hearing is about all the research you did in order to pronounce my name without even me telling you how to. I'm very impressed. So.
Oh, thank you. That was I aim to please. I wanted to enter the room at a high level, and making sure that I can learn how to say your name was a big thing for me. So,
and Todd, we say this every week that we have an amazing guest, but this guest is the best guest we've ever had on for one simple reason. Maranda was at the CS 100. Shout out to David Blake, who runs that event. It's fantastic. But she saw a poor vendor that was sitting at a booth. I was so sad. And she had this case of Diet Coke. And I just said, please, could you provide me a Diet Coke, ma'am? And she was kind enough to do it. So that's why she's my all-time favorite guest ever. Anyone that gives me a Diet Coke is that they're a hero in my book. So I also want to say, Maranda, thank you for having charity on me on that day.
Of course. And it's kind of a funny story. So a lot of folks that know me know I drink copious amounts of Diet Coke. It's almost embarrassing. And Josh Zamora, shout out to Josh Zamora. This started 2 CS 100s ago. I was up, in Sundance, and all they had was Pepsi everywhere. And I'm like, what is this? Where's the Diet Coke? Josh was coming up to CS 100. I texted him. I'm like, hey, could you swing by and just grab me like a case of Diet Coke? I'll pay you. So he shows up, brings me a case of Diet Coke. That was year one. Last year, I never even asked him. He just showed up with a case of Diet Coke for me. kind of as a joke, but it was so hilarious because he walked into a room full of people carrying a case of Diet Coke to me. So it was. So I ended up carrying it everywhere with me for like the full day.
So takeaway is the small things matter a lot in your relationships, even if it happens to be a little case of Diet Coke.
Absolutely.
Maranda, let me make sure the audience knows who you are. I tend to do the more serious introduction, and Casey, as you know from the Diet Coke commentary, usually does the silly one. So Maranda is the Senior Vice President of Customer Success and Ops at Datasembly. Maranda has over 20 years of experience both working in and building world-class operations. She has extensive experience building and scaling teams in early and mid-stage startups, and has been part of 4 companies with successful exits, 1 unicorn, which means that she could. I mean, if you can exit unicorn status, this is me ad-libbing, by the way. That means you're doing a good job. So, fun fact, by the way, Maranda is now working on her 9th startup. So she's been living this life for a long time. And while she has owned everything from sales and marketing, HR, biz ops, finance, and various other functions, her passion remains with customer success. Maranda has been honored as a top 50 CCOs to watch, top 25 customer success influencers of 2021, 2022, and 2023, and I'm sure 2024, she's already got the record going, so it's just going to happen later on, and various other awards from CS and leadership. She also sits on numerous boards and is on the advisory board for the University of San Francisco's Customer Success and Insights MBA program. That is, I mean, we're just talking about somebody awesome. So, Maranda, did I miss anything? Is there anything else we should add to that amazing list of background?
I actually contemplate just taking the awards off because it feels obnoxious, because I'm very thankful, don't get me wrong, but like 2017, 2018, 2019, I cut those all off, right? So I'm just like, if it didn't happen in the 20s, we're just not going to talk about it. But no, I don't think you missed anything, and I appreciate the awesome introduction. As you can tell, I have been around the block in startups quite a bit. What it doesn't tell you, though, is I spent the first 10 years of my career working for very large organizations that were $40 to $50 billion a year in revenue. That's really where I got my start, learning how to do portfolio management and ISO auditing and build training programs and Six Sigma and all that cool stuff too. So that kind of parlayed me into a world in which my operations chops brought me from Michigan to Silicon Valley, and the rest is kind of history. So
Mm.
It's awesome. Well, we have the Michael Jordan of customer success on, Todd. Like she just collects rings. That's what she does. I
yeah,
love it.
Right.
So
You got to go.
Miranda, we also like to get to know you a little bit more on just the fun side of things. We're going to get into a lot of business today, and the topic is just phenomenal for us to talk about. But we have 5 questions. This is this or that. So you get 2 options. You just choose which one you like the best. Okay, so simple game. All right, number 1, settle the debate, Miranda. Toilet paper, is it over or under when you put it on the roll?
it's
Which
over.
direction it needs to go?
Which
Over.
direction?
Over.
Over.
What kind of animal does under? I mean, think about it. Like you're reaching to try to get the like it's just not efficient, okay? Like
Not
operations rate,
efficient.
remember?
Oh,
It's inefficient
Ah,
to
there it
do
is.
I'm
That
sorry.
that's brings some serious credibility too. You've got the
got some
operations
serious
background. I trust that
credibility.
answer as a result.
And I
All
believe
right.
there's some kind of patent that's been passing around. I don't know if it's fake or not, but I'm going with it. They're showing like the original patent that shows the toilet paper goes over. So
Yeah,
Ah,
yeah.
and the evidence, no less, even better.
Yeah. All right. Question 2. If you had to survive a zombie apocalypse with one Disney character as your sidekick, who would it be and why? Well, that's not a this or that. That's more deep thinking on this one.
yeah, no, that's a really good one. And I don't know if you saw this on LinkedIn, but it was like a couple weeks ago. I was in New York City for a board meeting, and we also did our executive planning session. And part of it was planning out who would we bring from our team and to survive an zombie apocalypse, and what roles would we give them. I was nominated the leader
Oh
by the
no.
executive team to lead the faction through the zombie apocalypse. So, who would I bring? Immediately, my mind goes to Aladdin
Nice.
because we'd just be able to like fly around, um, and it just
And
seemed
he's scrappy. I mean, he lived in the streets. It's like he's he's lived through an apocalypse a little bit before he
well,
tried to blow up the world. So
yeah, exactly.
That's
It's a
awesome.
gosh, that was a good one.
yeah.
Superpower choice. Invisibility or the ability to always know where you misplaced your keys.
Oh, I never misplace my keys. I have never
Oh,
lost my AirPods. I
wow.
rare if I lose stuff. Now that I do lose chapstick everywhere. So there's probably like if you find breadcrumbs from me, it's usually chapsticks all across the United States at airports and chapsticks and lipsticks. I lose them like crazy. I would have to do invisibility because I don't think I've ever
That
lost my
makes
car
sense.
keys. So
Awesome. Star Wars or Star Trek?
do I have to pick neither? Can I say neither?
Yeah, that's fair.
Uh, if I have to pick, I'll do Star Wars. Um, I watched the first 6 movies, but I didn't watch them until the early mid 2000s. I realized they're actually a love story. I'm just gonna say, but they're very long. That's why, and it's really hard for me to sit still that long. I don't have an attention span that can sit through 2.5, 3 hour movies unless it's Goodfellas, Godfather, Casino.
Okay.
But,
All right.
um, but yeah, so a little tidbit about me.
And the last question, would you rather go back into history and mess up maybe uh, or see historical events? You could mess it up or you could see it. Or would you go to your own personal life and avoid awkward situations?
Oh, history. I, I, my life, I will tell you, like, I'm an awkward person in general, so there'd be just so much correcting I would need to go back and do. It's just, it would take too much time. And also, quite frankly, I like who I am. And I think,
That's awesome.
my boss, Ben, the CEO of our company, said something to me. He's like, awkward moments never killed anyone. And it's so true. And
Mm,
it's just stuck in my head. But I would love to be able to go back and witness history or I don't know if I'd make a few adjustments, but maybe I would. But
Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome. Well,
Well,
Miranda, thank you for playing.
that's the fun thing for me is even whenever we're being a little silly as we get started here, I always walk away with some nugget. A little bit of awkwardness never killed anyone is actually a really great piece of
Solid.
advice. So,
It's so true.
I,
I I can't even tell you. I got on a stage once and I was like, "Good morning, everyone," and they all sat there. I'm like, "Okay, so I've already lost 150 people. I don't know how," and all I've said is "Good morning," um, but it was awkward. But I got through it.
That's
So
awesome.
Well, let's go ahead and dive in. One of the reasons why I think I was really excited to talk with you today is one, your background is amazing because you've gone through so many different small startups. You've also worked at large companies, and the world that we're in right now is shifting and changing pretty dramatically. And even if you were just to jump back a couple of years, the way SaaS companies operated, how they spent their time, what people were doing, it was everything seemed to be kind of going great. And now a lot of the motion in the industry is a lot of anxiety and fear and struggle. And the one of the questions we wanted to start out today and ask you is, when you think about customer success and the way we're supporting customers, is the industry of client success, is it thriving or is it dying? What do you think, Miranda? Let's dive in today.
I don't think it's dying. I think it's evolving.
Hmm.
I wouldn't even say it's thriving. I would say it's evolving. It's in an evolutionary mode. Customer success and how we did it in 2020, 2021, before then, it's just dead. Um, I've been talking about this for years, but talking about we have got to be tied to revenue outcomes. Now
Hmm.
I'm even shifting how I say it and saying we have to own revenue outcomes. So it's the, I'm very thankful that I have lived through multiple economic downturns. So I already run my teams very efficiently. But we don't have the luxury of having a 5-person deep account team on every account. So CSMs have to step up and put on the renewals hat and put on the strategy hat, the expansion hat. And it's a big change for a lot of folks and a lot of companies because you can't have, somebody that just handles the relationship and somebody that just handles the
Hmm.
sales. We have to get smarter about how we're doing all these things.
And why is that? Why that change? Why can't it be the same?
Well,
What's the data saying? Is it just too? It's cost prohibitive. It's just not working. Like what are you seeing?
oh, it works. It works to have all of these different functions, but it's cost prohibitive. So if you think about what happened towards the end of 2022, the beginning of 2023, interest rates started going up. When interest rates go up, PE firms, VC firms, where they get their money from, it gets a little lighter because the cost of money goes up. So the investors that are putting money into their funds, they're a little bit more scrutinizing of
Hmm.
where they're going to put their money. When the cost of money goes up, the free flow of money from VC firms to tech startups gets lighter. They're much more careful about at looking at your unit economics to make sure you are benchmarking at a certain place for them to make a smart investment. Of course, they still know that they have to hedge their bets and have some that they know are probably going to fail and some that are just going to blow it out of the water, but they're way more cautious. Because they're being way more cautious, what happened is a lot of folks who are operating at growth at all cost modes, hiring ahead, having roles that may or may not be mission critical, they're looking at what can I do now to get closer to the unit economics so I can secure my next round of funding, to operate at higher efficiencies, and so on and so forth. There's a big trickle down effect happening in tech right now from that.
So in the past, companies could when money is flowing and it's easy to bring in revenue, or not even revenue, just bring in investment dollars, it's okay to run at a loss for a longer period of time
Exactly.
and try to drive growth. And it didn't matter if you're profitable because you can afford to burn.
Bingo, bingo.
But
But
today it's a lot harder to actually justify burning money when you can't guarantee that you can bring in another round of investment.
exactly. I think a lot of executives are experiencing whiplash right now because for the first time ever, they're hearing their board say, "So when are you getting to profitability?" And they're like, "What do you mean?"
Wow.
We're profitability. What does that mean? Because a lot of companies are just used to operating at a loss, aiming for that really massive growth, that massive valuation for that strong exit. And now they're having whiplash hearing from PE firms have almost always been there, to be clear, but now they're hearing it from VCs as well. And VCs have almost always been like, okay, well, we're going to make it rain dollar bills.
Mhm.
And that is going away. And another downstream impact, tech companies are consumers of tech. So then the next impact has is okay, and I did this myself last year. I led a company through 2 rounds of layoffs. I did a massive financial audit. I did a line by line expense audit. I was looking at what is mission critical, what is not, what can we reduce headcount on. I notice we have 2 tools that I think are the same. Can we consolidate? Like that is also happening where you have folks like me who are just opening up the expenses and going line by line and going to each functional leader and saying, can you take a look at the usage reports? How many people really need seats? So that is also happening too, which means churn, downsells, all of that is increasing.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think we sometimes take for granted in the SaaS world, is the fact that every single company has to use technology. But we sometimes, I think it's easy to go out and think like, well, surely I'm business critical and surely my customers needs me, and but then we do the same thing our customers do to us. When we're trying to evaluate how we're going to be successful, and yet sometimes that those dots don't get connected. For CS teams, especially as this evolution is going on, what do you think CS leaders need to be thinking about that they weren't thinking about in the past?
Yeah, so one of the advice points that I'm giving to a lot of CS leaders right now is take a look at what is the minimum experience necessary for your customer to be super successful on your product. Um,
Mm,
you get a lot of folks who want to build out these massive programs that are
hmm
white glove and you know everyone gets a named CSM and don't get me wrong, like I love giving the best possible experience I can to every one of my customers, but I'm also not naive to the fact that there's a cost that comes with that. So really understand what is the minimum experience necessary for your customers to be successful. And successful means they're achieving their goals. There's a strong ROI story, and then you know that you're going to be able to grow and expand with them, right? That's thing one. I had another thought, but it escaped me. So maybe I'll remember in a minute.
So as you're trying to think about that experience that you want to give to your customer, are you saying it's a percent of the cost of support, and we're going to play within $1,000? We have $1,000 per account,
Yes.
and then that's how we're going to go by, or like how do you give? What's some best practices you give to the audience today?
Yeah, you just reminded me of what I was going to say, and then I'll answer your question. For the first time ever, too, I want to remind everybody of this. We have to start thinking about monetization of customer success and the customer platforms, especially with the larger B2B enterprise type accounts. I can't ever suggest somebody to monetize customer success if you have like I was a HelloSign alumni. We had accounts that were free, some that were $9.99 a month, and some that paid thousands of dollars a month, right? Like the price point has to be right. But if you're at that higher end, like for the first time ever, folks need to really think about monetization. I know services revenue has a very different valuation than subscription revenue. So be mindful and know how your board thinks about services revenue. But I am starting to notice that they're opening up a little bit to the idea of more and more services revenue. The more PE people I talk to, the more VCs
Mm,
that I talk to, yes, it's not the valuation, that you would normally get. Like services revenue can get like a 2x, 3x, where
right.
subscription revenue historically has been like 10x plus. But right now, revenue is king. Revenue is revenue. Revenue is king. And if that's going to help fund your team, and also helps your customers continue to expand and grow, like that revenue is gold. Creating services revenue to support and grow the subscription revenue is always a win. Um, and then to your question, Casey, say it one more
Yeah.
time. I'm so
But yeah,
sorry.
what were the best practices in trying to provide that experience? You said a minimum experience to get the business value that they're looking for. What's some best practices in saying what should that look like? Is it do you do a percent of the subscription cost and say, okay, we're going to work within 2% of the subscription cost, and that's what we have. So let's see what experience we can provide to get them to do this, or is it this is the experience we need to provide, and this is what it's going to cost us, and then let's build that in. Does that make sense? Like how do
Yeah.
you know where you're at?
It does. It's going to depend on your organization. So, what I would do if you're a CS leader that's trying to figure out what that is, get with your finance leader and understand how much of my CS team sits in COGS and how much of my CS team with cost of goods sold and how much of my CS team sits, maybe under the sales and marketing bucket, which is looked at a little bit differently when you're scrutinizing your bottom line. I wouldn't say there's a ton of benchmarks out there, to be clear, of what the spend on CS should be. But if I were you, I would first get with your finance leader and see where are you being classified and how do you get yourself out of COGS
Mm,
and into sales and marketing, especially if you're owning renewals and upsells, because you are driving revenue. And that is the direct way to tie your team to revenue, which makes it easier to justify headcount, budget asks, and so many other things. Now, in regards to finding what is the minimum experience needed in order for a customer to be successful, have some trusted advisors that are customers and understand, you know, if you're doing weekly trainings with your customers, like, could you switch that to biweekly? Could you switch that to once a month? If they're used to you coming on site every month, could that be quarterly? Could that be twice a year? Take a look at everything you're doing, document it all out, and then figure out the frequency and say, could we push the needle a little bit on this? Is this actually helping? Is this necessary? Instead of it being a live training, could we do a recorded training so whenever they onboard team members at their organization, this just becomes part of their training program, right?
mm.
And also know that while you're going through this, your customers are probably going through the same thing. So they're probably looking for more efficient ways to exist. So it probably won't be a surprise to them that you're doing the same thing.
So, it's interesting your point about the fact that you want to get out of being stuck in cost of goods sold, because then it creates this perception that all the CSM is essentially a cost, and that cost is just impacting the bottom line. You want to switch that perception to be revenue generating. And what's interesting to me is you mentioned two things, and I think this is the part that I see, at least when I've worked with different CS teams, that the personalities and the people that they have on those teams can vary dramatically. Meaning some people are some client success people are very technical, they're very training, they're very support minded, which is more of that cost center type approach, especially if you can't monetize it. And then others are they operate more like an account manager, and they're very focused on renewal, and they're very focused on expansion and growth within the customer. And so, like, from your perspective, is it better to try to specialize and split those teams apart? Or, we kind of mentioned the fact that
Mm.
you can't always afford to have someone who like you, it's better to have people who are more jack of all trade and can do kind of everything, or maybe or there's a perception for it's more cost efficient that way. So I'm
Mhm.
curious from your perspective, what can CS teams do to change that perception and get out away from being just a cost center?
Yeah, so I heard a few things that I want to unpack there about generalist versus specialist and the different personas of a CSM. So I want to be very, very clear, and I say this all the time, there's no one size fits all model. If
Yeah.
you are in uh, companies where your product requires that of your CSM for you to be a little more support minded, um, like that may be what's required. I would challenge you to say, is there a way that that can move to support or maybe training org or something like that? But I do know that there are companies out there that require, in order for the CSM to be viewed as a strategic thought partner within their customer base, they have to be able to train on the ins and outs and,
Mm.
show them, talk to them about what's going on in the industry and, so on and so forth. And I don't think having that mind plus maybe a commercial mind is mutually exclusive. I do think you can
Mm.
find people that can specialize in both. The point you made about the generalist versus specialist, I want to tackle that for a quick second. Um, in early stage startups, it is incredibly common that you have a company filled with a bunch of generalists. That is not
Yeah.
abnormal. Especially, I remember, early days at Hello Sign, for example, I would clean the refrigerator out, build chairs, answer the door, and, deal with billing and receivables and customer success, customer support, professional service, API engineering support. You get the idea. Like
Right.
that is not uncommon. It doesn't scale well, but it is not uncommon in earlier startups. So if somebody's listening to this and you're a smaller startup and your CSMs do support, implementation, renewals, and portfolio management, that's okay for a while. But you have to have a plan and know when and what you should be peeling off and in what order. Example at Swiftly, when I joined, that was very much so how, the handful of CSMs they had were functioning. We made a determination that the majority of CS's time was actually spent doing implementations and support, with the majority towards implementation. So the first thing we peeled off was implementation. And then we rolled with that for a little bit. And then the next thing we peeled off was support, right? And then we rolled with that. And then we kept peeling. And then we had these specializations, which helped us be more efficient. But we didn't do it all at once because we couldn't afford to. And also, just the scale we were didn't make sense to have all of these people that would be fully loaded with 25% work. Like 25% of their work is, just this one thing. And then they have to go do all these other things, right?
Mm. So Miranda, in today's world, you've again hit this point two or three times about the CS team being tied to revenue. Again, every SaaS organization is different, but are you saying that you're seeing the trend of CS handles renewals? Do they also handle the kind of expansions? Are they actually doing expansions also? I know it's very common that, hey, I have a team that does, net new business and they get it for a year. Then after a year, it turns over to this other AE team that goes to expand it. And then we have the CS team that just does the renewals.
Yeah.
Are you actually saying that maybe you might want to consider the CS team looking at doing some expansion also, or are they just focused on that base renewal?
So there's so many ways you can slice this.
Give it to us.
I have always had mixed feelings about having CS do the commercial renewal or the commercial upsell. However, I have no problem with giving my CS team a CSQL goal,
Mm,
because they are, if they're doing their jobs, they are the valued partner, strategic thought partner. They're having regular cadence of communication with the customers. They're surfacing the problem statements, understanding what their goals are for the next 6 to 12 months, and really figuring out where are we ripe to partner more? And so historically, I've not had my teams negotiate the actual upsell because those things can take time. Sometimes it requires
Right.
going to RFP, and sometimes it requires like these massive undertakings behind the scenes because I do deal with much larger contract values. So my answer is I think you should do what's right for your company. However, I do think your CS team and every CS team should be tied to CS qualified leads, and they should be thinking about strategic ways we can continue to grow with our customer base. That should be part of their goal. Now, how do I bonus my teams is a
Yeah,
good
I was going to
question.
ask you that. Yep.
I didn't know you were going to ask me that, but so my CS teams now and historically have been bonused on two main components. That is their gross dollar renewal. So you have $100 up for renewal, did $100 renew. That's thing one. That's 50% of their bonus. Thing two is net dollar retention. And I want to know, like, okay, so you grew, or you renewed the $100, but did you grow it at all? And the gross is tied to your individual numbers. The net is tied to a team number.
Right.
Because what I don't care about is who takes it across the finish line. I don't care if it's an AE. I don't care if it's an SE. I don't care if it's me. I don't care if it's, Bob. Like, if we're growing the customer base, we're all winning. And I don't like the whole territorial thing, which tends to happen the
Hmm.
more,
Yep.
you divide these. Like, that was my upsell. I identified it. I got across the finish line. And then the salesperson's like, but put my name on it because I get commission. Like it's just everybody wins if we meet, the 115% net or the 120% net. And then that's that 50% that they qualify for.
Yeah, that
Wow.
makes a lot of sense. In other words, you want to make sure that you're creating alignment across the team to where they're I get it, right? We all want to win, and if you create the wrong incentive structure from a compensation perspective, then you're not going to do any favors at getting people to work together to actually accomplish the ultimate goal. So
Exactly, exactly. And I've seen it actually do the opposite. The
Hmm.
further you take CS into the commercials, sometimes unintentionally so, it can create a bigger division between sales and CS because it muddies the water. And sales, they live on the dollars that they get across the finish line. In this way, I don't care if they get the dollars across the finish line, and I don't care, how it got there. If it's getting there, that means CS is probably doing what they should be doing to allow that transaction to even happen, and everybody's winning.
It's awesome. Miranda, I have two daughters, and one of my daughters, I'm really trying to push her. She's interested in technology, and I'm trying to push her into considering customer success, client success as a role. If you were to give her some advice, what would be the top three skill sets that you believe? And again, it's changing year by year, like you've said. But if she was going into the market today, what are three of the skill sets that you would be looking for?
What I tend to look for differs company to company, of course, but currently, I'm a big believer that I can teach hard skills all day. I can teach you how to do a pivot table. I can teach you about data aggregation, or once upon a time I could even write a little bit of code. I probably couldn't teach it, but um, I'm really big on soft skills.
Mm,
So some of the things that I like for folks to bring to the table is like this entrepreneurial spirit. Like they they own things. They own it so extreme that everything is done with this level of quality, like it would be their company, their business. I don't know
mm,
how to put that into a skill set, but I think you get what I'm saying. It's like this
yep.
scrappiness, like you don't know the answer. I'm not going to just be defeated. I'm going to go find the answer. It's that grit. Um, Again, I work in early stage to mid stage startups, so that is incredibly crucial because usually you're coming in and you're not getting a full user manual that says, "Hi, welcome to work. This is how you do work," right? Like you have to sometimes figure stuff out. Another thing is a very healthy curiosity about how businesses work. So, not just the business you're in, but the industries you're serving,
Mm,
understanding like what does the customer base care about? Right now, I'm working in data for CPG and retailers. Very complicated world. CPG, which is the manufacturers and the retailers, very complicated world. You have to have some kind of curiosity about that world to be able to appropriately serve those customers. You got to understand what are the problems that they experience and how can you help, be their thought partner in solving that. So they got to have that bone as well. Um, I think other things is just table stakes like communication skills. I will never underrate the value of somebody who can communicate strongly in multiple methods. Like,
mm,
you know, can you write a strong email in a way that somebody will read it? I'm not talking
mm.
walls of text, like,
Yeah.
how people absorb information. It's like a couple sentences, three, four, five bullet points, couple sentences, boom, right? And can you break stuff down, like very complex things that are happening in a product and break it down to where anyone can understand it. Those are things I look for quite heavily.
Thank you. My daughters, thank you.
That's right. I think, Miranda, one of the things that's cool about that is just to think you get back to that idea of especially when you're kind of in that startup mode, you have to be a little bit more of a generalist. Curiosity goes such a long way in allowing you to be able to fulfill multiple needs for a company. I want to go back really quick to something you mentioned earlier. Maybe it's just because it's been rattling around in my brain because I think this is a really interesting idea, and I've seen this from a couple of companies more recently, which is around how do I monetize and the service of the CSM. Um, and I think one of the things that I'd be curious to get your take on in this evolution is what do we mean by that? Meaning, like, are we just charging for live trainings? Are we is it by the hour? When you ask me to do a project, I'm doing that for you. I guess, what have you seen as far as the strategies that companies are taking to try to make that be a service that they can charge to their customers?
So it's a really good question. And a few things that I have seen is one, especially with larger contract values, some customers expect that you're going to charge like a certain amount of professional services or an implementation fee or, something. You can bucket your CS team under a services fee right within
Mm,
the contract out of the gate. Um, and make sure you're very deliberate about what's included in that. Like, you get 2 on-site trainings a year and you have access to, Sue in customer success who's going to meet with you every other week. Like, get very deliberate about with what's included, and it's usually a certain percentage of the contract they expect to have that kind of fee, larger organizations. Another creative thing that I've seen done that I find to be very interesting is building out a subscription for access to, this service, this service team. Like, you can get this self-service option with access to help center, video, and you can email support, but you can't talk to support, right? Like, that's what you get for free. Now, if you want a phone number and you want a CSM, um, and this is what would be included in that, uh, you know, that is $99 per month, and we put that on your contract, or, I'm just making a number up, but it just becomes like a part of the subscription. And that is, interestingly enough, like, I've built, pretty large call centers. That is a very standard thing in call centers to have a per person per month charge. If you have like a Castlite Health, for example, I was there for a while, and we would charge like 50 cents per member per month, and Walmart had 900,000 employees that were using our platform, right? You do the math. But
yeah.
they didn't bat an eyelash about that charge because that's normal. Now it's just taking some of the old school stuff that some of us older folks have been doing for years, like in customer support, and starting to leverage it in a different way with our customer success teams.
Yeah, I've seen Microsoft make that change. They definitely went to what they call customer investments. They want to make sure that realizing your full value of what you've invested, but it's what you've invested in your support contract or what you've invested in your licensing, right? But putting the ownership back to the customer, not so much on them. I'm curious, Miranda, how do you make sure that you don't lose sight where you all of a sudden start to become a services company, right? Like, are you just trying to make like 10 points above your cost on services? Like what is, and again, there's not just a perfect answer to this, but are you looking to make just a little bit of profit on the services, or are you actually trying to say, no, we should actually make a healthy amount on services? Like
I
what's your best practices on that?
my 2 cents is you want to it's really just enough to shift you out of a cost center. That's all.
Mm, solid.
You have to get creative, but once again, I want to call out, make sure you understand how your board views services revenue. You'll have some folks that are very allergic to it and they're like, yeah, no, don't touch it. Um, but you'll have others out there that are like, yeah, shoot, revenue is revenue. Let's bring in the revenue, right?
Yeah.
For me, first you got to know that and know where your board stands, the folks that are putting money into your company. And then, for me, I'm not looking to make bank. I'm just looking to get out of the cost center mode.
Ah, Miranda, so good. So good. This is SaaS therapy, Miranda. So what we are shooting for is the audience where they're just pulling their hair out. And for me, I have no hair, so I can't even do it anymore. But
You've already pulled it all out.
I've already done
So,
it all,
yeah.
being in these startups worlds. But Miranda, at this beginning, you said like the CS is being asked to do more. I'm sure there's customer success people on the phone today. They're like, Miranda, I can't do everything. You're asking me to now manage the renewal. You're asking me to be more strategic. I still having to do training because I have these customers call me all the time. Oh, and by the way, because we just let go of 3 CS people, I now have 200 more accounts. What advice do you have for that CS person that says, I can't possibly do anymore and I feel like I'm dying as an individual in this job? How do they thrive? What would be some advice you give to that person?
Well, one, if the leaders of these orgs are expecting these teams to function the same way they did with three additional heads, or, now they have less team members, more work, that's delusional. I just want to call that out. Like, that is bad leadership 101, of saying, yeah, 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 we cut our CS team in half and we let go of the AMs, so now you're going to own the renewals and the upsells. But here, let's give you all of their accounts too and go. Like, that's delusional. That's where the whole minimum experience needed for the customer to be successful comes in. They have to go back to the drawing board and think about the customer journey and what's necessary and what's not necessary. What can I automate and what I can't? Can I start leveraging AI? AI, like, I believe that leaders that aren't starting to tip their toes into or dip their toes into the AI pool are going to be left behind as well. Like, there are a lot of things out there that will allow you to free up your team to be able to do the things that require critical thinking. Like, you want them doing the things that require critical thinking, not just the, reactive, I'm going to send you a link to this help center article and I'm going to send you a link to this training. If you're a CSM that is going through this right now, I know it's scary to advocate for yourself, but really get at the data as to what has changed and what's being required and break down what you're doing in your daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly. Open up a spreadsheet and just keep it open for a few weeks, and every day write out spent 2 hours answering emails and 1 hour prepping for this call, and just do this for a while, and then take that to your leader and have a very informed, data driven conversation around where you're spending your time, where you want to be spending your time, and how they could potentially help. Because I'm not going to make excuses for bad leadership, but leaders as well are very overwhelmed, underwater, getting 50 million things thrown at them. And if a CSM were to come with that type of information um, and have that type of conversation, I'm sure that I hope that they would entertain that conversation and try to creatively think through how they can pluck some of those things off the table.
It's awesome. That part's going to be played on rewind for a lot of people, I'm sure. That was fantastic, Miranda. Thank you.
Of course.
It's true. If you're a leader, don't be delusional. That's one of my takeaways. That's for sure. And if your boss is delusional, figure out how to tell them nicely. That's the other side of that.
Very nicely, very
Yeah.
nicely.
That's sometimes we make the joke that I'm the really bad AI summarizer. That was my attempt to be the bot who summarized that point there.
Nice.
Miranda, as we close up with this, and just as one final question that we always really like to ask our guests, as Casey mentioned, this is SaaS therapy, and what's the most important thing when you go to therapy is you got to go and have some homework. So if you could give people who are listening to this a homework assignment of anything that they could do to help their teams in the face of evolving CS teams, what would your homework be?
I encourage leaders out there and CSMs to not be afraid of process. You have to have a nice balance. You don't want to over process things. You don't want to create process for the sake of creating process. But one of the biggest efficiency killers in companies is people doing things various ways, and there being confusion about how to do certain things. Like, get clarity in your team, help them have process available at their fingertips to know how to do certain things, and that alone is going to create efficiencies, like major efficiencies. So homework is get comfortable with process, understand what is the right level for your organization. Don't overdo it. Don't underdo it. Do the Goldilocks and Three Bears version of it, like the just right. So
I love that, Miranda. Maybe the way I would say that, I really loved your point about clarity, right? And it's the reason process should exist is so that we know where we're going and that we're ensuring that we're going there. And if the goal is to make sure that we document everything, but we have no idea where it's going, then we're wasting our time. So I love the idea of keeping the eye on where we're going to go and how do we make it as easy as possible for our team members to get ourselves to the destination we want.
exactly.
Miranda, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We love getting to talk to thought leaders like you, and man, I just really hope that people go back and listen to some of these chunks on repeat, just because there's so much good meat here. You've been a wonderful guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Miranda.